Hey, welcome and welcome back to the Stash. We live in a very weird time when it comes to Spider-Man comics. The main title, The Amazing Spider-Man, is in its worst state ever, with just simple bad writing mixed with a bad editorial team. Us, the fans, have had to heavily rely on additional titles outside the amazing name for stories that are actually worth our time, whether it's Shadow of the Green Goblin or Ultimate Spider-Man or even comics that aren't even his like Venom Wars. Now, there's surprisingly been a brand new series just recently released that caught my attention, so I set out to the city and picked up a copy for myself, and I gotta say, in terms of Spider-Man comics of 2024, this issue is right up there with one of the best for me. So join us today as we dive into issue 1 of Spider-Man Black Suit and Blood. But before we get into that, I just wanted to quickly let you all know that we are trying to reach 3,000 subscribers before the end of the month. I know it's a huge ask, but with your help, I know we can do it. So if you like Spider-Man or just comic content in general, feel free to stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. But anyway, with all that being said, let's get straight back into the video. Now for this book, there isn't really a recap, but just more or less context for the issue, so I'll go over that before we go into the story. After the events of Secret Wars, Peter returned to New York City with a brand new costume created by alien technology that responded to his very thoughts and generated organic webbing. But Peter soon learned that the costume was actually a living organism called a symbiote. After refusing the aliens' attempt to permanently bond together, they battled for control and Peter ultimately beat the creature. Over the years, Peter has rejoined the symbiote or worn a black fabric version of the costume. These are some of those untold tales. One of the interesting things about this comic is that although it's pretty standard page length, they managed to fit 4 stories within this book. The first one being Losing Face by J.M.D. Mateus, second one Inside the House by Alyssa Wong, then Dysmorphia by Dustin Nguyen, and lastly Fade to Black by J. Michael Straczynski. For this video, I only wanted to focus on the first and last story from this comic, mostly because they feature 2 returning greats of Spider-Man writers, as well as them being the only 2 stories with a bit of substance to them. So Losing Face begins with the makeshift funeral of a 2-bit hood, Joseph Fasillo, who I believe was in J.M.D. Mateus' amazing Kraven's Last Hunt story. In his own words, he was nothing more than a first-class loser who died so broke there wasn't even enough money for a proper funeral. At the very least, some of his mates within his lonely profession gathered around to show some respect and raise a few bucks to actually get a burial. All of a sudden, a certain web-slinger entered the bar. He wasn't there to drag anyone off to prison. No, he was simply there to help. Without anyone asking him to, he gave some of his own money to lend a hand. We turn the clock back all the way to one of Joe and Spider-Man's last ever encounters. It was clear he never really respected a guy like him. To be honest, he was never given a reason to though. Joe was heavily intoxicated at the time and he smashed through a window and without grace or being subtle, he attempted to rob the entire place. Spider-Man, as you'd expect, stopped the robbery, but instead of handing him off to the police, he did something a little unexpected. Later on, Joe is a little less drunk and the two share a conversation on a rooftop. Joe asks why didn't he just hand a low life to the police. Spidey simply wanted to understand how a man could fall so far. So Joe tells him. He tells him about a kid with smarts, promise, and a loving family. A kid who hated rules, adored trouble, and fell too much in love with the juice. Joe continues to explain that he actually did clean up his act for a few years, and he managed to find a good woman who would later marry him, and then the eventual demise of said marriage. He even mentions how he hasn't seen his son in almost 2 years. He's got nothing to live for anymore. All he sees in the mirror is a lost cause. Spider-Man assures Joe he is not a lost cause. He explains we all have our pain and regrets, but the question is, what do we do with them? He gives Joe a choice. Either get dropped off at the precinct now, or make him a promise to get help. Real help. Joe, without hesitation, promises to turn his life around. But he asks, why would he take a chance on a guy like him? Spider-Man doesn't answer. He shoots a web line and swings off, saying that he'll be watching. Joe sits there and begins to wonder to himself about Spider-Man's pain, Spider-Man's regrets. A guy who just did what he did doesn't do that unless he's been there himself. For once, Joe was a man of his word. He joined AA, got a job, his wife even let him see his son again, which made it all worthwhile. Speaking of his wife Isabella, it's obvious she'd never fully take him back, but just to have that chance to sit and talk to her like old times just meant the world to Joe. Later on, Spider-Man and Joe meet up. Spidey was surprised to see his coded ad within the Bugle Personals, considering he was meant to be out of the snitch for money biz for good. He explains that it's something big, something horrible. He fills Spidey in on a child trafficking ring and gives him the location. As Spider-Man swings off to the destination, a mysterious figure praises Joe on just how well he is at lying. At the place now, Spider-Man makes light work of the men upstairs. He hears a movement in the basement and makes his way right into a trap. No children, no Russians, just Jimmy Delgado, a low-level mobster trying to make a name for himself, and a room full of his armed men blasting away at the wall crawler. Spidey leaps in for an attack, but the sheer volume of criminals gets the better of him. When he wakes up, he's greeted to Jimmy Delgado gloating about how easy it was to take down the great hero of New York. To add salt into the wound, he also parades about how much of a backstabber Joe is to Spider-Man. But suddenly, the lights go out. Fear begins to seep within Jimmy. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, he practically had Spider-Man dead. But then, the lights flicker back on to reveal all of his men knocked out cold, with Spidey nowhere to be seen. Now it's Spider-Man's time to taunt. I mean, he's beaten the greatest of the greats. What made Jimmy think he would even have a chance at getting the upper hand over someone like him? He also reveals that Joe filled him in on everything beforehand, and Jimmy didn't like this one bit. He reaches for Joe and attempts to hold him hostage, however with quick thinking he manages to subdue Delgado with 2 swift moves. Later on, Spidey suggests Joe should just skip town for a while until things cool off. He does and decides to move to Idaho where he had some family, but the truth is, yes, he was reformed, but after a couple months stuck there, he went stir crazy. He headed back to New York, started to drink again, running scams, he did everything. But then, he fell victim to a heart attack. One minute he was in a boozy bliss, the next, dead as a boot. Our story ends with Isabella reading Joe Jr. a bedtime story. They're interrupted, however, when Spider-Man enters the window. Isabella couldn't believe it. I mean, he called, but no one would actually suspect that was the real Spider-Man. Joe Jr. asks if he knew his dad. Spidey replies with, "Sure did. We worked together." Joe Jr. is filled with excitement. I mean, his dad worked with his favorite superhero ever. Spider-Man continues, "Guess you could say he was my unofficial partner. Help me take down some very dangerous criminals." Joe Jr. asks if he was a hero, like him. Spidey says confidently, "Well, considering your dad didn't have any superpowers and went after the bad guys anyway, I'd say he was the better man." In the end, what was I to him? Just a footnote in the Spider-Man story, an asterisk at the bottom of the page. But he went out of his way to do right by me, by my family. And I swear, I'll be grateful. Forever. This first story was simply beautiful. It shows the much more deeper and personal side to Spider-Man. It shows why he's our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. You take a guy like Joe, falling completely off the deep end, he's a criminal, an alcoholic, the worst of the worst basically. No one in their right mind would give him the time of day, and no one did, until Spider-Man came along. And what do you know? Joe showed that you don't need powers to save the day. Even someone normal like him, you, me, we have the capability to do good. Sometimes all we need is just a helping hand. It's another one of those examples of why people look up to this character, why people, myself included, want to be more like him. He's meant to be an inspiration, and this story perfectly shows why he is. JMD Mateus is a master, especially when it comes to the webhead, and he shines once again. I'm glad to see that this man still has got it, because right now, in the time we're in, and we're stuck in, we need more people like him to bring back a hero, and this was an amazing story to do that. Next up, we have Fade to Black by J. Michael Straczynski. It's Halloween night. The streets are filled with costumed children looking for some sweet candy, as well as people like a certain Peter Parker who've got way too many of their own issues to enjoy a bit of dress up. Well, the fun candy kind at least. Pete's quickly on his way to his and MJ's apartment to get changed for the big party. Halloween, since the fateful event of Secret Wars, has left a sour taste within Peter's mouth, mostly for the fact that because of the whole thing on Battleworld, he brought back a certain alien symbiote. He believes, though, it's old news, but he couldn't have been more wrong. While getting changed, a menacing figure makes his presence known. It's the symbiote, more desperate than ever for a host. He's rightfully concerned with how this thing got into his apartment. This one is the small whisper that stuck around deep inside his DNA, while all the rest left and became venom. Peter assures himself and the symbiote he does not want or ever need him again. He broke the hold the black suit, fabric or alien had over him a long time ago. The symbiote is intrigued. He requests to be enlightened about what the hold was. Peter explains when he wore the black suit, he didn't have to pretend anymore. It allowed him to do what needed to be done. The symbiote is very insulted by such a statement. Peter continues saying it's the truth. The symbiote replies with, "It's a truth, but not the truth." There are 5 kinds of truth. The truth you tell strangers, the truth you tell casual friends and family, the truth you tell only a few people in your life, the truth you tell yourself, and the truth you can't even admit to yourself. I'm truth number 5. Pleased to meet you. When we were one, a power flowed through you potentially greater even than your own, and that gave you 2 things you did not have before. First, it gave you someone to blame when you acted out with greater violence than usual. It wasn't me doing those terrible things, it was that thing. For a man who prided himself on his guilt for every little thing he ever did wrong, we gave you expiation, an excuse someone outside yourself to blame. We gave you a scapegoat. And a man can go far on that. Second, because you were acting with us and for us, for something that was bigger than you were, it gave you authority. And what is authority, moral or otherwise, but just another costume? The police officer in his uniform has the legal authority to arrest you. A priest in his robe has the moral authority to forgive you. A doctor in his lab coat has the power to save you. Their costumes mark them as representatives of a higher power, a greater authority. If a judge came to the bench in just a suit and tie, do you think nobody would recognize her? So what's the point of the robe? The judge wears it so she's constantly reminded that she's not just a person, that she represents the power and authority of the state. You made that red costume when you were just a kid. Kids don't have authority, neither did you. It was the juvenile version, nothing more than a Halloween costume to hide your face. We made you an adult, gave you power and authority and someone to blame if things went wrong. And you miss that, Peter. You miss it badly. That's why you made that spandex impersonator for who we were and what we gave you, to remind you what all that felt like. The black suit's not about freedom to be yourself. You don't even know who that is. It's about reliving the moment where you were us, when you had power, authority, and were utterly free of guilt. And that's why I'm here today, Peter, to offer that back to you one last time. I'm a whisper of what was, an echo, an ember. But if you breathe on that ember and allow me to come forth, you can have those things. We can be what we were before. Except unlike the rest of me, I have no desire to run the board. This time, you would be in charge and I would merely be at your service, acting in your authority. Otherwise, I will die. Because reaching out to have this conversation has taken the last of my remaining energy. Say yes, Peter. Let's get the band back together. On your terms. No. Thing is, you're not wrong. There were moments I did enjoy those things, which is exactly the reason I booted you and the rest of you out the door. Feeling guilt when we've hurt someone we love, or in a moment of foolishness allowed someone else to do the hurting, it reminds us that we are part of a community and a family, that it's not just about us. If we can be strong enough not to let the guilt destroy us, or we have someone in our life who can give us a little of their strength when we need it, we can go on. And we can become more than we ever imagined. Out in the open, without blaming anybody else or looking for someone to say it's okay to be those things and do those things. Because we're not alone. And that's the real reason we're having this conversation, isn't it? You, Venom, Carnage. Yeah, you can do what you want, but in the end, you're all alone. You're dying and you're alone. And you don't want to die alone. And believe it or not, after this talk, I'm genuinely sorry about that, but I can't go back. Ever. And you were right about some of the things I felt when we were together. Bigger, stronger, more powerful, more of a badass. Like they say, clothes make the man. And here's the big secret. The main reason I still wear the black costume. You're right. I'm a nerd. And even nerds like to feel like a badass once in a while. We get dressed up to see our sweetie, because it's an event. Because every night we get to see our sweetie is an event. We turn out in basic black, and we're styling, and we're with someone we care about more than life itself. And we ride the night to the other side of dawn, never looking back. Once again, a legendary Spider-Man writer coming back to do what he does best. The story, just like the first, is what we really needed, especially fans of Peter and MJ. You can just tell that J. Michael Straczynski loves writing those two. The ending was perfect. The final shot, the final spectacle of the relationship that means so much to so many people, myself included, it was simply beautiful. JMS explored a lot here within this short story, and I really enjoyed the more psychological aspect towards Peter and his relation to the symbiote. He also, in such a short time, managed to capture everything that's great about Peter and his character. He highlights his empathy, sense of responsibility, his strength, and even his sense of humor, while ultimately emphasizing that it's okay to lean on others if we need to, that we aren't alone. Overall, this comic, which in a way was pretty unexpected with all things considered, is yet another happy surprise. The first and last stories were pretty much perfect, with JM returning to his familiar and adored Kraven's Last Hunt period to expand on what is already a fantastic story, and then JMS finally coming back to write an amazing short story focusing on Peter and the symbiote's relationship, showing one last ditch effort to get the band back together. The ending as well with MJ was just perfect. It was the perfect way to end an already incredible issue. I highly recommend, if you can try to pick up this comic for yourself, to do so. It's honestly a great read. Sure, the little two extra stories didn't do much and were there more or less to fill up some pages, but the main two features, as well as the artwork throughout the entirety of the book, is really something special. But that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, because here, any support means so much. I'd love to hear what you thought of this issue down below in the comment section. We can start a conversation. Be sure to tune in next time, same web time, same web channel. Thank you guys again for watching, and see you in the next one.